Good morning and welcome back to The Message, a video production of Holly Grove Christian Church and yours truly, Andy Rose. I apologize for not having a video last week and being a little late this week, but such is life, and it is a busy time both in my work life and personal life as well as the life of the church as we are in the season of Lent and getting ready for the season of Easter. Today I'd like to talk about something that most Americans take for granted: food. But before I begin today's talk, I want to say that some of the topics that I will briefly touch on may be of a sensitive nature to some, and I'll be expressing my own personal opinion, which has been informed by my study of the scriptures and life observations. And it may not be the only opinion out there, or your opinion, and it's certainly not any official opinion or stance of this wonderful congregation that I serve. Just know that it comes from a place of love and compassion and not judgment of any differing points of view or life experiences. With all that being said, let's talk about food. Humankind was created by God from the soil of the earth, formed in God's image, and given life by the breath and will of God, and we are both sustained by that earth and faith and love of God, both of which are divine gifts, or grace if you prefer. And the Bible is full of stories that involve food, from the Garden of Eden to the manna in the wilderness of Exodus, to the feeding of the 5,000, and the Last Supper, which we'll be commemorating especially on Maundy Thursday. Sometimes the food or these meals and these stories are used as metaphors, sometimes just settings, and sometimes as holy interactions, and occasionally all of these things. One central theme to all of these is that God has freely given us all that we need, just like the sparrow in the field, an inclusive gift for all of creation. But how we use or misuse that gift or those gifts is on us. And as is the sinful nature of man and our selfishness and self-love, we have found ways to make this inclusive gift of God exclusive as a means to gain wealth and power. And the results of this are staggering. In the United States of America, supposedly the richest country on earth, in 2019, over 35 million Americans did not know where their next meal was coming from and were food insecure. American households with children were 1.5 times more likely to be lacking regular access to food, which works out to about 13.6% of American households. Last year, 2020, the year of the pandemic, those numbers swelled to an estimated 54 million Americans who went hungry, and 27.5 to 29.5% of households with children lacked food. All of these hungry people and these hungry children, in a country where we spent well over $14 billion just on political campaigns last year. And we have spent over $772 billion on making war and death. As Christians, we should be appalled with these numbers. As a people who are called to be pro-life and believe that every life is sacred, we must do more. We must be concerned with the whole life and not just the beginning. I ask you, what good is it to save the life of a baby only to have it grow up starving and hungry and unloved, physically, mentally, spiritually, all of that? Now our church, like many others, operates a food pantry, which is indeed a blessing and certainly a big help to our less fortunate neighbors. But in reality, food pantries and government assistance programs they're just a patchwork of band-aids on the symptoms. They're not a cure for the root cause. We have to examine and make changes in our personal involvement in the systems in the society that perpetuate this problem. Our current food system in this country is one of extraction and waste for the benefit of corporate greed, not one for the benefit of you and I, and certainly not for the benefit of the farmer. In fact, as odd as it may seem, the very people who produce much of the food in this world, family and small farmers, are often the most likely to face food insecurity. They can't afford the very things made from their back-breaking labor. Now let's take a moment and look at something we do every Sunday. The Lord's Supper consists of the bread and the cup. And I have here a loaf of bread and a carton of grape juice. Now this loaf of bread here was likely made from wheat and other crops grown somewhere in the United States. The farmer who grew it had to rely on expensive seeds from a corporation, expensive fertilizers and pesticides from other corporations, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment like tractors and combines, and all the fuel and maintenance that goes along with those, and farmland purchased or leased from other farmers who had gone under themselves. And they have to do all this just to remain competitive and keep from going bankrupt themselves. Most farmers in this country are one bad harvest or one bad swing in the commodities market, which is caused by people gambling on Wall Street, from losing every single thing that they have worked for. Not just their livelihood, but also their family's heritage and what makes them them. This cup, whether it be juice or wine, came from fruit grown in vineyards or orchards that could be anywhere in the world. Some of that fruit could have come from countries where the workers are, for all intents and purposes, slaves of the state or the wealthy landowners and are mistreated and God knows what. Some of the fruit may have come from the United States, where over 75% of the farm workers in this country are the people that enable you to buy cheap food at a grocery store and throw away half of it. 75% of the farm workers in this country are migrants, okay? And these migrant workers are often paid starvation wages, forced to live in squalid conditions, and subject to abuse, rape, and all sorts of horrible things because they're invisible to us. They're on the margins of our society. A lot of people consider migrants and these types of folks to be the them, not the us, right? Yet these people come here knowing the dangers. Because despite of all those dangers and risks and the backbreaking labor, it's better than where they came from. And we take them and their work for granted. We take for granted the processes and systems overall that get us our food. We go to the grocery store or Walmart expecting cheap prices, and then we complain about the price of milk. When the farmer who goes out twice a day, every single day, to milk his cows, among all the other things he has to do to keep those cows healthy, is making about the same amount of money that he was making or she was making in the 1980s. How many of you are making the same amount of money you were making in the 1980s? So how can we, as individuals and Christians, work to change this? Here are just a few ways, a few things to look at doing. Be a conscious and thrifty consumer. On average, every American wastes 1 pound of food a day. That's 103 million tons of perfectly good food that goes to waste every year in America. Some of it is household or individual waste, but most of it is waste from food production, restaurants, arbitrary expiration dates, etc. Think of all the perfectly good fruits and vegetables that go to waste because it's shaped weird or it has a spot on it. It's still perfectly good. Buy local and buy seasonally. Yes, it may cost a little more. You might not be able to find an ingredient that grows in the summer and the winter. It may cause an inconvenience. But that extra cost is extra money that goes directly into the farmer's pocket and their family's stomachs. Another thing you can do is to grow a garden or take part in a community garden or gardening program. Educate and connect your children and the community. Connect them to the rest of creation excuse me, that sustains them and God commanded us to manage. Yet another thing is to demand political and governmental change to the laws and policies that have pretty much been enacted by corporate lobbyists to squeeze out the little guys. You know? Government can't change or do everything, and neither can the church. But they can help if we force them to do so. Volunteer and participate in programs that educate, enrich, and empower poor and low-wealth people. You know, volunteer as a gleaner to go out after the harvests and pick the leftovers in the fields for those in need. You know, there are several Christian organizations and charities in our area that do just that. And lastly, when you eat, give thanks to God not only for the food, but for those who made it possible to arrive on your plate. The farmers, the migrant laborers, the factory workers, the truck drivers, etc. Pray for them and seek ways to help them either through personal relationships or through charities, government policies. There's a number of ways. But just remember, next time you go to the grocery store and you get ready to pick that item off the shelf, just think about all the people and things that had to happen for you to be able to get it there. And were those things in line with your morals and with Christian morals? Now, I've barely scratched the surface of both the issues and the potential solutions. And I'm not an expert on food policy or food theology or any of those things. I'm just an everyday person like you. And I know that it's not going to be an easy fix. And I know it's very, very complicated. And it happened over many decades and cannot simply be undone overnight. And it will take work and it will take some sacrifice. But I want to leave you with this thought. When Jesus fed the 5,000, you know, his disciples said, let's send them away, Lord, and let them find their own food. You know, let them disperse in their own little groups and find their own food. Which would have probably led to many of the those with lesser means to go hungry in order to remain there. But instead, Jesus rebuked them. And he instructed the people to all sit together and share what they did have, to form a community of equals sharing equally and taking only the portion that they needed, just like the Israelites in the wilderness with the manna. God gave freely what they needed. And all were fed from the abundance of love, the abundance of community, and the power of community when we all work together, share together, and love together. That is what God desires for us to create. What will you do to help us build this community? Amen.